If someone had asked me a year ago what the strongest part of my marriage was, I would have answered without hesitation: trust. I never imagined that something so invisible could disappear without me even noticing. Emily and I had been together for 6 years. We never checked each other's phones, questioned purchases, or wondered where the other person had been. We believed trust was something you earned once and kept forever. We were already planning the next chapter of our lives. We talked about having our first baby, booked vacation time for the summer, and spent evenings looking at houses with enough room for a family. Everything felt stable, and I honestly thought we wanted the same future. Looking back now, that's what hurts the most. Nothing seemed wrong. There were no arguments, no cold silences, no warning signs. Just two people building a life together, or at least that's what I believed. The beginning of the end came from something so ordinary that I almost ignored it. One Saturday afternoon, I was looking for a receipt in the kitchen drawer when I noticed a credit card I'd never seen before. It didn't seem important at first. When I asked Emily about it, she barely looked up from her laptop. She smiled and said it was almost paid off and that she'd close it the following week. Her voice was calm, and I didn't think twice about it. A week later, she told me the card was gone. She said she'd borrowed a little money from a friend to pay the remaining balance. I even thanked her for taking care of it so quickly, because I believed the problem was already behind us. Now I realize I wasn't thanking her for solving a problem. I was thanking her for protecting the illusion that everything in our marriage was exactly the way I'd always believed it was. A few days later, the story changed. This time, she casually mentioned that a coworker had occasionally used the card for business expenses and was paying everything back. The explanation sounded strange, but I wanted to trust her more than I wanted answers. Then another explanation appeared. Her grandmother called me one evening and said she'd sometimes withdrawn money using Emily's card because she wasn't comfortable with online banking. It sounded believable for a moment, but something about the conversation didn't feel right. That was the first time I stopped listening to the words themselves. Instead, I started noticing the pauses, the hesitation, and the tiny contradictions. Every answer solved one question, but quietly created two more. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused. The woman sitting across from me looked exactly the same, but for the first time in 6 years, I had the unsettling feeling that I no longer knew the person I loved as well as I thought I did. That night, after Emily went to bed, I stayed alone in the living room. I looked at our wedding photos, the travel souvenirs on the shelf, and the notebook where we'd written possible baby names. Nothing around me had changed, but somehow everything suddenly felt different. I kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe stress had made me suspicious for no reason. Deep down, I wanted to believe that far more than I wanted to know the truth. I had no idea the credit card wasn't the real problem. It was only the first loose thread, and once I started pulling on it, the entire picture of the life we had built together would slowly begin to unravel. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about those conversations. Every explanation sounded complete until another one quietly replaced it. It wasn't the money keeping me awake anymore. It was the feeling that I was constantly one step behind the truth. One evening, while organizing documents for our taxes, I noticed several unfamiliar transactions. They weren't outrageous purchases or luxury vacations. They were dozens of ordinary payments that, together, painted a picture I had never been invited to see. I sat there staring at the statements longer than I should have. It wasn't because of the amount. It was because every charge represented a decision Emily had made without me, while still smiling at me across the dinner table every night. When I asked her about the transactions, she didn't argue. She didn't even try to deny them. Instead, she quietly sat down across from me, covered her face with her hands, and started crying before saying a single word. "I didn't want you to think I'd failed," she whispered. Those words echoed in my head. I wasn't disappointed because she'd made mistakes. I was devastated because she'd carried those mistakes alone while pretending everything was fine. She finally admitted she'd been trying to build a small online business for months. Every setback convinced her that the next investment would fix the last one. Every failed attempt made it harder to admit she was sinking deeper into debt. At first, she believed one successful month would erase everything. Then another expense appeared, then another. Before she realized it, she wasn't borrowing money to grow a dream anymore. She was borrowing money to hide how badly it was falling apart. I listened without interrupting. Part of me admired how hard she'd tried to make something of her own. The other part couldn't understand why she'd chosen silence over the one person who would have stood beside her from the very beginning. "So why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked. She looked down at the floor for several long seconds before answering. "Because I thought once I told you, you'd never look at me the same way again." The truth was almost unbearable. She had spent months protecting herself from a rejection that never existed. Instead, the lies slowly created the very distance she had been afraid of all along. Then came another confession. There were other balances I didn't know about. A few personal loans, several missed payments. None of them were impossible to recover from, but every new detail made me wonder whether I'd finally reached the end of the story. I hadn't. Every time she finished speaking, she looked at me and quietly said, "That's everything." A day later, another memory would come back. Another forgotten account. Another explanation. Another piece of the puzzle I never asked to solve. That's when something inside me quietly changed. I stopped asking whether she was telling the truth. Instead, I found myself wondering how much truth was still missing. It's a painful place to be when the person across from you is the one you trusted most. People often think relationships fall apart because of money. Sitting there across from Emily, I realized money wasn't what was breaking us. It was uncertainty. I no longer knew which memories belonged to the life we'd actually lived and which belonged to the story we'd been pretending to live. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had over the last year, searching for the moment everything changed. The hardest part was realizing I might never find it, because sometimes trust doesn't collapse in a single moment. Sometimes it disappears one quiet secret at a time. The following weeks felt strangely normal on the outside. We still ate dinner together, still talked about work, and still shared the same house. But every ordinary moment carried an invisible weight neither of us knew how to lift. Emily apologized every single day. Sometimes it was with words, sometimes with tears, and sometimes with the quiet way she'd leave my favorite coffee on the counter before I woke up. I could see she was trying, but effort and trust are two very different things. She offered to sell her car, cancel every subscription, and work weekends until every dollar was paid back. She kept saying the debt was her responsibility. The strange part was that I had stopped thinking about the money a long time ago. One evening, she looked at me and said, "If I could go back, I would have told you everything the day it started." I believed she meant it, but belief isn't the same as trust, and I was only beginning to understand the difference. I asked myself the same question over and over again. If she'd come to me the very first time she realized she was in trouble, what would I have done? The answer never changed. I would have helped without hesitation. That's what hurt the most. She never gave me the chance to be the husband I thought I was. She decided for both of us that I couldn't handle the truth, and that decision quietly changed everything between us. Friends kept asking whether I was going to forgive her. I realized forgiveness wasn't actually the hardest part. Forgiveness is something you choose. Trust is something you feel, and feelings don't return just because you ask them to. I started noticing how different our conversations had become. Every time she told me something, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Is there anything else?" I hated that voice, but I hated even more that it had a reason to exist. Some nights, I'd walk through the house after she'd gone to bed. I'd stop in front of our wedding photo and wonder how two people could still love each other, yet feel so far apart. It's amazing how silence can make a room feel larger than it really is. She never stopped trying to repair what had been broken. Maybe that's what made everything so complicated. This wasn't a story about someone who wanted to hurt me. It was a story about someone who made one fearful decision, then another, until the truth became too heavy to carry. I don't know what our future looks like. Maybe some couples survive moments like this. Maybe others don't. Every relationship reaches a point where love alone isn't enough, and you have to decide whether trust can be rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. People often say money ruins marriages. I don't think that's true anymore. Money only exposed the cracks. What nearly destroyed us was fear, silence, and the belief that hiding the truth could somehow protect the person you love. Today, when I think about everything that happened, I don't remember the numbers on the statements or the size of the debt. I remember the moment I realized I no longer recognized the certainty I always felt whenever she looked me in the eyes. Maybe trust isn't broken by one big lie. Maybe it disappears through 100 tiny moments when honesty feels uncomfortable and silence seems easier. By the time you notice what's happening, you're no longer trying to solve a problem. You're trying to find your way back to the person you thought you knew. I still haven't answered the biggest question. Should I fight for the life we dreamed about, or accept that some promises can't survive the weight of too many secrets? If you were in my place, would you stay, or would you walk away?
In the darkness, I could feel her thinking about somebody else. Some old secret she keeps hidden high up on the shelf. It's all covered in dust, holding up some old books supposed to teach about heaven and hell. In the darkness, I could feel her thinking about somebody else. I hear country music playing in the background, some old sweet melody about the life we lead, the love that we never found. I said I love you, she said, honey, now, yeah, just keep doing what comes natural in the heat of the night. And if we're lucky, that country music will make it